Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is Jeff Jones, and with me today, as always, is the panel. So we'll say hello to the panel. How you doing there, Big Jeff?
Hey Jeff, I'm doing great. I'm glad that people are tuning into our episodes. I think the panel has gelled really nicely, and I'm looking forward to finishing this one off and maybe even starting another one. So let's have at it.
Let it rip. Hey, Cal, how you doing today?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me back, and it's good to be back with the panel.
All right. And Dr. Silkman?
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here. Yes, I think our shows are being really well received, and it goes to show that when something important comes up, we stop the podcast and we go and check it out.
And that's the truth, exactly. So the fact that you mentioned that, Dr. Silkman, brings us into our first kind of agenda item of the day before we get to the video. Because last episode we stopped the podcast because there was a release of the Bobby Dassey November 9th interview, which has now circulated to the community, has been cleaned up in the audio. There are examples on the Foul Play website. You can find it at the Mystic Jinx's original link, and I'll put that stuff in the description. But basically, because we stopped the podcast last week, um, because we were about to go into these not depositions, excuse me, these testimonies of Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadich, and we thought, wait, this this new interview could change our perception. So we just kind of stopped, as most of you know that listen. And what I want to do now is ask you all, like, was it worth it? Should we have stopped? Should we have just, jokingly saying that? But what are your impressions of this interview now that you got to hear it? And we'll start with Big Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. So a couple things that are worth mentioning on that interview. First is that they obviously redact some things out of it. As you're listening, they bleep some things out when it comes to names. They bleep Scott Tadich's name out. They bleep Mike Osmondson's name out. They bleep out the place where Bobby Dassey works, who happens to be where Mike Osmondson's father works. And it also wouldn't surprise me if the overall if they redacted more out of it. For example, they do have 30-minute tapes. The first tape does flip around 30 minutes in that interview, but then the second tape only flips at around it's like 20 at about 46 minutes. So where's the other 15 minutes of time that ought to be on the second tape? I don't know. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was anything meaningful on that, whether they redacted it or cut it out. Of course, they don't say that they do. They don't tell us what we have. It's typical of the cops to be hiding stuff on that. Um, did I mention kudos to Mystic Jynx for being so persistent and getting that? If I didn't do that, I should have done that first. So I apologize for not getting to that first. But it's just amazing to me, how much time they spend trying to convince Bobby that the cops would never plant anything, right? It's almost like a me, protest too much kind of situation. Didn't you guys see the 1985 case? Didn't the Avery family have to live through the 1985 case, where it was just a complete and total setup from the very beginning, including 18 eyewitnesses? Sort of a veritable impossibility that Stephen could have committed the crime logistically, and you're going to try and convince a family member that there's no way that the cops are up to no good. Who in their right mind is going to believe that horse shit? So that the with what we got, I found it mildly underwhelming. We know in the jail calls that um, Dolores Avery tells Stephen Avery that Barb says that they really put Bobby through the ringer on this. I didn't really get that impression. I'm not sure whether Barb is lying or whether maybe Bobby lied about it to Barb about how difficult it was, and maybe it is hard to tell just from the audio how much Bobby might have felt that he was on the hot seat I don't think there was any major revelations here that we didn't know about, but there are some things worth digging into a little bit deeper. We can ask ourselves the question of whether he was telling the truth about what happened during the one of the lines of questioning is, did you answer the phone at 9 a.m.? We know from the computer records, and there are people who say the computer records are planted, that he did a lot of surfing of his porn at in the morning. That didn't come up in the interview. He didn't manage to spill that to Dietering, and it's not clear that he was online when that phone call came either. So I guess he couldn't have been, because they had the kind of internet that it might have hung up on you, or the phone might not have rang if that happened. But that doesn't come up. So I just found that I was a little bit amped up for what might be on there, and I ended up a little bit underwhelmed. And whether or not that was because stuff was cut, or because we don't perhaps have the whole thing, I don't know. And I guess the last thing I would mention is, if you listen to Earl Avery's interview, and of course in the Queso report, they say Earl didn't say anything. His interview goes on for about an hour and a half of saying nothing, and they question him both before and after they actually take his DNA sample, and it appears to me that that with Bobby's, they stop it when they get the sample. So there's nothing afterward. At least recorded. Now I seem to recall a picture of two tapes. Both tapes have 30-minute sides, so that could have been up to sort of 2 hours worth of interviews for what they had. But we have what we have right now. I'm glad that we have it, but I suspect that there's some stuff missing.
Just to question, and everybody, if you don't mind answering this one, like, the question I'd like to ask is, has your perception of Bobby or the overall case changed after this interview?
Well, not really. I do suspect that there might be a gem in there, but we didn't get it. I think Bobby does sound a little bit nervous in the interview, as any 19-year-old would be. Given the situation and trying to avoid being labeled as a suspect, and you would do that whether you did or didn't do it. So not really. No changes for me.
Fair enough. Who wants to go next?
I will.
Okay.
I think I'll start with what you your main question. It didn't change at all for me, because I've been pretty open and vocal with the fact that I try not to look at. I can look at everyone as a Denny, and I agree there's alternative suspects than just Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. I don't, you know what I mean? But it didn't change in terms of anyone's guilt or non-guilt. I think when I listened to it, the biggest impression I got out of the entire recording was the reflection of what it meant for law enforcement, not Bobby Dassey. That's how I was more viewing it, versus whether Bobby's guilty or not. I agree with Big Jeff. I think he did sound nervous, but being the fact that he was being questioned over a lady's murder, who wouldn't be? He's 19 years old. He's rattled. If he had something to do with it, there's cause for nerves. If he didn't have anything to do with it, he's got causes for nerves. He's very well aware of what law enforcement can do, and I think that rings true when he actually says in the recording that he thinks Manitowoc law enforcement planted, and that kind of takes me to where I kind of went in terms of the law enforcement versus the Bobby Dassey. What stood out for me more, I said in the open mic with Foul Play, help me make this make sense. Kathleen's giving us a narrative that Bobby Dassey potentially did this, and I accept that. He makes a fantastic Denny suspect. He really does. But what kind of contradicts her motive of getting him to be that Denny is, we're hearing it being undone in this. If he had planted the bones, the blood, the Rav, why don't we hear him push his uncle under the bus? Here is his chance to convince law enforcement that what they're finding is authentic to Stephen Avery. The last thing you want to or would expect would be him to point out there is planting in this case for them to look deeper and actually do their job and realize something doesn't fit. He never once, not once does he say, yeah, my uncle, it was my uncle, or alluded to the fact that Stephen was responsible. I think that speaks volumes because honestly, there was his chance that he had spent days prior framing his uncle and to seal his work, and yet he doesn't take it. That really, it doesn't make sense for me. Why would he frame his uncle to then try to get them to then frame law enforcement, because that's who he accuses, for law enforcement then to blame Stephen Avery just so he doesn't get looked at as the perpetrator? Make that make sense. It doesn't. I think leaning back to what Big Jeff said, I agree. I don't hear them pressuring Bobby Dassey, but in fairness, we don't know what pressure for Bobby Dassey means. That's his interpretation. He may have felt that the way they were asking the questions, the fact that they boxed him in a car, there was a very tight interview, the questions were leading and they were using the read technique on him. I think that he felt that immense pressure, and that was his interpretation of they were coming down hard on me. Barb and Ma Avery were not there. So when they did vocal that he was being pressured, that was their hearsay moment. They were only repeating what Bobby said he felt. And you can't take that away from Bobby Dassey because that's not fair. If Bobby Dassey felt he was interrogated and it was pressure, then we don't have to accept it, but we have to understand it. And that's basically where I'm at with Bobby. And I'm just glad that we did get to hear it. Thank you, Mystic, because for me, it cleared up a few little misconceptions in the community. One being the fact that there was um, there was a understanding that he may have been late for work for 2 hours that night. That has now been cleared. Not once did Bobby Dassey say he was late, nor did he say it was 23:30 he started. That was just mistyped when it was written by Dietrich later in the report. And secondly, there was always that, for a while there, it was that this interview didn't mention a fire. It wasn't recorded. Now we have proof that it was. And thirdly, Scott Tadich was spoken about. We don't see that in the reports. That was when I did my graph and I'd like to capture little things. What I did was I made a spreadsheet and I broke down every interview. So I have interview 1, 2, 3, 4 of Bobby Dassey, and I took the main parts out of it, like does he mention a fire, the time he got up, the time he went hunting, and I in every interview I break down and I kind of try to see what is inconsistent and what is consistent. And now we have a bit of a nicer little tidy up of that, because when we had only the report from Queso of the 9th, we didn't have the audio. Now I was able to clean that up. And I don't want to say that I'm confident in it, but I can say with what I see here, there is more of a consistency. I know that the consistency changes once he gets up on the stand, but in all his reports leading up to it, there is a flow, and I will be happy to share what I did for you guys to show that flow, and you guys can follow it along. Over to you, Dr. Silkman.
Yes, I essentially agree with all my panelists. First of all, kudos to Mystic Jynx for getting that report and airing it. And yes, if you do want to listen to a bit of a cleaned up version, it is available on Foul Play. I think Mystic Jynx has got a copy as well. I do believe that it was significant, in my opinion, and I'm glad that we did stop the podcast and have a listen to. Foul play, as Kelly alluded to, we did an open mic, which was really, really good discussion. And we also had Bobby Dassey's mother, Barb Yanda, Barb Tadich actually, in chat. So it was very interesting to have her present. To me, I think that taped recording interview said a lot of things to me personally. It has changed my perspective on Bobby to a degree. I do believe that Bobby Dassey does make a perfect Denny, but having a listen to that recording, I believe he genuinely was scared. He was concerned, and I do believe he was very genuine. Put it this way, if Bobby Dassey is involved in any manner, and I'm sure the panelists will agree, it meant that Bobby Dassey was a complete psychopath in terms of, like, this is the 9 days or so after the event, considering what happened to Teresa Horbach, and he was able to maintain, being relatively cool, didn't give anything away. But what I found more telling was the attitude of the law enforcement officers. The mere fact that they went into this great big spiel that a conspiracy could not be possible, it'll be too big, there'll be too many people involved. And to me, I don't know about the other guys, but my ears pricked the moment he mentioned the crime lab, right? I think it was Deidre talking about the fact that you would have to have some form of corruption in the crime lab. And that's exactly what I've been talking about for a long time now, in that you don't need a vast conspiracy. You need an insider in the crime lab. And of course, and Big Jeff and Kelly, I'm sure, will agree what Jean Couchet stated during a deposition, the mere fact that, DNA evidence can be manipulated and can be faked. To me, I think that was a very important point. I mean, think about it, guys. The aim, what they were there to do, is simply to bring Bobby Dassey to the hospital, get his fingerprints, a buccal swab, photograph his body, and send him home. The mere fact that they went into this great big spiel regarding, oh no, it couldn't possibly be a conspiracy, we're not involved. I'm thinking to myself, guys, you're telling this to a 19-year-old, right? It made no sense. It was a form of intimidation, in my opinion. I'm very, very glad I got to listen to that recording. To me, for me personally, it has changed my perception of Bobby Dassey, right? There's no doubt they put it squarely to him, right? Why would your uncle jam you up? So they're setting up this incredible scenario whereby, okay, who do you think did it, Bobby? And I agree with Kelly. Here was his golden opportunity to point a finger at Stephen. He never did. And you know what? I respect Bobby for that. That was extreme pressure, in my opinion. But Bobby held true and didn't agree that it was Stephen Avery. And that took a lot of guts to do.
And as Jeff, you've said to me how many times, if you don't believe in conspiracies, I'm showing you one right here.
No. That's right, Jeff. As a matter of fact, they do go into the 1985 case a little bit, don't they? And they say, and do you know what happened? They sent out agents from the DCI, right? And it's Deb Strauss and Amy Lehman. And guess what? Those people are on, are on recording, and we have their depositions, and they're looking like fools with their pants on the ground, right? Because of the things that they uncovered or the questions that they refused to ask during that investigation of the 1985 case. So to bring that up as evidence that law enforcement couldn't possibly have done this is absolutely stunningly stupid and ridiculous. What an idiotic thing to do, to try and hide behind that. Over.
Well, I agree. I mean, it's sort of like funny. in a way, they're saying, look, there's no way that there can be a conspiracy, and yet they lay out exactly how a conspiracy would take place, right? So that sort of raises your eyebrows, because remember, Bobby said their attitude, the Avery and Dassey family's attitude was, don't talk to the cops, right? They saw what happened to Uncle Steve in 1985. They knew that he was being targeted. So hence, in a way, Deirdre and the other officer, I think Homerall, had to give the impression, no, 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 we're the good guys here. There's no way we would set your uncle up again. I just thought that was rather amusing. And the other important thing is, people's minds can be polarized by a lack of information. And it's amazing that the more information that we get through documents and recordings, how that potentially can change the landscape. And that's really, really important, in my opinion.
A few little points that you guys brought up that I wanted to echo through. The whole, when the law enforcement said to him, for conspiracy work, if 3 people know, 2 of them need to be dead. And then in the next breath, he talks about like forensic and all that can't be whatever he says about the forensic side. And you think, well, Jean is dead, so there's one of your people down that would have known. It just made me not smile, because the whole thing was just pathetic, but it's like their own little confessions. They were having their own little confession squirts of bullshit, and it's like, you fools, you're saying it without saying it, but we're getting it. And secondly, a lot of people like, and I'm not coming down on hard for people thinking this, because like you said, it's perception. I can't change the way someone hears it and how they interpret it. But when I do hear people say, oh, he wasn't answering questions, he sounded guilty, just stop for a minute and remember one thing. Be very careful how you say that, because in my opinion and others, Bobby did what a lot of people should have done, and that was shut the fuck up. He wasn't giving any more detail than what was being asked to him. He wasn't offering more. He wasn't talking. They were giving him leading questions, and he would only give them a yes or no, like come back, or very limited. And do you know why that was? Because in my opinion, he didn't trust them. And for him not to trust them, that speaks volumes of where Bobby's head was at that stage. He didn't think Stephen Avery had done it. If he had done it, he wasn't cashing in on that moment for them to be only focusing on Stephen. He, in my opinion, hearing that, he was thinking they had done something, or they were a part of something. And I think we have to be mindful of that.
So my little last one before we get into the testimony is that it was good to see that the corroboration that early on of the Scott, the fact that Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadich sort of passed each other, going different ways, if you will, on Highway 147. You always thought from the beginning when I first watched Ma'am, that was just something that was concocted out of whole cloth for one reason or another, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be anything nefarious associated with that. It's just that the cops kind of pressured them to say it because it helped them with their narrative. But I think as we're going to see, the timing of when this actually happened, based on people's recollection, shortly after the events happened, doesn't match what goes into the official narrative of the state, and how that actually becomes exculpatory for Stephen. And I don't know whether it's inculpatory for Bobby or not, but in order to pass at the time that Scott Tadich said they did, Bobby Dassey had to leave that Avery salvage yard a good 10 to 15 minutes later than he said he did. So,
For what it's worth, and to you, Big Jeff, and everybody else who's ever wondered about that story of seeing them on the road, I have to say from my experience in living in rural Wisconsin, in that area, northeastern Wisconsin, that that's really common actually. Like to wave at someone you see coming down the road. I don't know why. It's just part of the culture, maybe. I don't see people. I guess when you know people in the area and I don't know. I've done it so many times throughout my time there. The roads are really long and straight, and you can see your friend's car coming, and you're like, I'm pretty sure that's him. I'm pretty sure that's them. And then you wave to him, and so it does actually kind of ring true. Um, at the same time, it does kind of sound made up. So it's kind of a coin toss for me on that one, where it sounds like it's too convenient, but yet that action of seeing each other on the road and like, hey, waving to each other, it does play legit to me. And that's just me. So people can take that for whatever it's worth.
I agree. I think, though, if you're listening to it for the very first time, it does sound very suspicious. And I have a feeling that they probably had to add the fact that, well, how did you know, Bobby, at what time you saw Scott? And Bobby said, well, I'm sure that Scott had looked at his clock, right? Now, okay, I can understand people driving past each other, they recognize each other, they wave, but I don't think that automatically means they're going to look at a clock and establish a time frame. Now, the reason why they had to do that is very obvious, because if Stephen is saying, hey, look, I saw Teresa leave, it meant that time-wise, you had potentially Teresa, Scott, and Bobby all in the same vicinity at about the same time, right? So that's potentially a very troubling piece of evidence against Bobby and potentially against Scott. So you had to establish some type of time frame when all these events took place, right? So I think there's a bit of embellishment going on here in terms of regarding, well, Scott looked up at his clock and he knew that the time was such and such. To me, that's stretching it a little bit. And I could understand now why people felt, that's extremely doubtful.
As you said, Dr. Silkman, the fact that Scott and Bobby and Teresa were on the road at the same time, crossing paths, it does bring in that element. And I think if I'm Steven and it's like Bobby's saying that he saw her walk towards your trailer, and you're like, why would he say that? It doesn't even seem right to me. Your natural reaction is going to be, well, maybe he's trying to push it off on me. So I think it is a natural kind of reaction.
Correct. But remember, Bobby Dassey was the one that admitted that he had jumped in his blazer and went bow hunting. So he had no choice. So he basically committed to the story that, hey, look, I saw her and I went in my car and I went hunting. And on my way to my hunting spot, I saw Scott Tadich, right? And now you could understand why that potentially sounds very suspicious, because Stephen is saying, well, look, as soon as I came out of the trailer, after I put in the Auto Trader magazine on my computer desk, when I came out, I didn't see Bobby Dassey, right? So now you could understand, wait a minute, he doesn't see Bobby Dassey. He says that he saw Teresa leave. So now we have a conundrum in terms of, okay, well, what did happen after Bobby left? Well, I'm not insinuating anything nefarious, but you can now see why it looked potentially so bad.
And we talked a little bit in the last episode about the new, well, they're not so new anymore, but released evidence photos that weren't available to the researcher community, even 3 years ago. But Henbury made a FOIA a while back to get some of this stuff. And what we do have is some pictures of the bobcats excavating the burn pit area. And just to remind everyone of the ludicrousness of the testimony of Dr. Eisenberg, who was afraid to, that these delicate bone fragments might get, broken if she sent them down to the FBI to get DNA tested or what have you. They excavated the damn things with bobcats. And we have the pictures of them. And I know, Dr. Silkman, you have a lot of comments about that. So why don't you take over?
Well, yeah, I did thank you, Big Jeff, and thank you to Hembury for getting those pictures. It truly is horrific when you have a look at what actually occurred. Normally, when you process a crime scene, especially when cremains are found, you basically do up a grid. You make sure that nobody comes in, nobody comes out, and you fully document where all the cremains are. Why is that important? It's important to determine the anatomical location of each of the cremains, right? And the irony, of course, is that there was no coroner, there was no forensic anthropologist, there are no in situ photographs, right? But what we do get a lot of in situ photographs are two bobcats completely decimating, which is rather ironical. We have in situ photographs showing them actually destroying the burn pit. And not only did they destroy it, Big Jeff and panel, they actually flattened it to the ground. So the irony is this: if there were any cremains, then they are the ones that moved it from one spot to another, which is rather ridiculous, right? So the last thing you do, guys, all jokes aside, you don't destroy the crime scene, right? And you don't use bobcats in order to remove dirt, because potentially you could be corrupting a crime scene, you could be modifying a crime scene, and potentially you could lose important pieces of forensic evidence. And Big Jeff will back me up in this. There's a photograph of one of the guys. He's in a suit and he's pointing at a small piece of bone. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what the hell does that mean? Is that bone human? Was it from the burn pit? What is it in relation to? That to me demonstrates the ludicrous nature of these so-called investigators trying to remember the burn pit was the size of a tabletop. They had no need to bring in bobcats and flatten the area. Why is that significant? It means that the jury or nobody else can go there and have a look at how ridiculously small that burn pit area was.
Everything around it is brownish. Everything is stained brown from the soil, except this bone, which is immaculately as white as the latex glove.
Correct.
That's
correct. And again, just to summarize it very quickly, if you don't know what it's in relation to, it's useless as a piece of forensic evidence, right? And don't forget, these are people that live in the rural area. They do barbecues all the time. They burn food scraps. They give pieces of meat to Bear, the dog. So if you don't know what the relationship is, forensically, that picture is useless. You need to know what goes with what.
And to me, the thing about that picture is, what am I supposed to believe? Am I supposed to believe that the blade of the bobcat kind of scoured the grass off to a flat thing, but as the 200-pound blade of the bobcat went by, that it just didn't happen to sort of go over this bone, and I was able to sort of leave it in that dark place. And somebody we need a picture of this. Here it is. It's like, what are we supposed to believe about that picture? It's ludicrous.
Yeah, this is a classic case of the horses bolted, right? What's the point of shutting the gates? So
Right.
Instead of them getting all the important in situ pictures of the burn pit and the cremains of the burn pit, they sift it really quickly, and all we have is a box of bones. We have no idea where they came from. And now they're spending an extraordinary amount of time taking pictures after the fact. It's completely insane, guys. It's ridiculous.
It is.
It's
Absolutely
actually
ridiculous.
it's actually kind of shameful, that the improper processing of that crime scene is not a reason in and of itself. Just to be able to cast doubt on the evidence collection process. If it, for example, if an illegitimate search warrant is issued in a case, or something, excuse me, the search warrant went beyond its scope and evidence is discovered, you can get off for that. Look up the case of Klaus von Bülow. They actually he murdered his wife, Sonny von Bülow, and they actually found a black bag in his closet that had a spent tube of insulin that he shot up into her to kill her. And it was determined in his first trial that evidence was inadmissible because it was improperly collected. So they had to give him a new trial, and they couldn't bring up the black bag, and he got off, and was found innocent. But that's what happens, if you mishandle evidence. And this, in my mind, was a very much more gross mishandling of evidence because of the lack of the forensic anthropologist and the lack of documentation of the in situ that Dr. Silkman talked about, great eloquence. That this whole collection of evidence is you wonder, is that something in and of itself that if this were maybe a rich person or someone that they weren't trying to get rid of, might have actually had a different outcome from that perspective.
I 100% agree, Big Jeff, and it goes to show that you have only one chance to document the evidence, and one chance only. You got to do it perfect and by the book, right? There's no point in trying to backtrack, and so what that does, in effect, is open you up to a lot of scrutiny. And I'll tell you what, everything that's been directed at the investigators, in my opinion, is fully deserved. You don't process a crime scene like that and then put up a box of bones and essentially say, trust me. You open yourself up to a lot of criticism and scrutiny. That's not the way you do it.
I have an idea for a new podcast, guys. It's called Discussing What They Did Wrong, but I'm afraid it might be a 100-part series.
That's correct.
We will never finish, Big Jeff. And Jeff.
All right, so let's get back to making a murder and discussing a murderer, back to the main event of today. So with that said, let's enjoy the final portions of episode 6, Testing the Evidence.
They will call Scott Taddock to this end.
It was the fire that I remembered most of that day.
All right, let's back up just a little bit. Could you tell the jury what you did that afternoon, please?
That morning I was up at my mother's. She had surgery. And then I left her and I went to the woods hunting. I went to my trailer, then I went to the woods hunting.
About what time was it that you got out into the woods?
About 3 o'clock.
On your way to deer hunting, that would be just before 3 p.m., did you observe anybody on the roadway?
Yes, I did. I saw Bobby Dassey on Highway 147. I was going west and he was going east.
Later that night, did you return to the Yonda property?
Yes, I did.
Could you tell the jury what you saw at that time, please?
Saw a big fire.
And can you tell the jury where you saw the fire, please?
Right there.
Are you able to estimate how high or how tall the flames were as you were watching there about 7:45?
They're almost as tall as the garage.
So
8-10 feet. I don't know, 10 feet maybe. 10 feet tall the flames were.
big fire.
It's a big fire.
As far as I know, this is a change of story for him, yeah?
Yeah.
So, I have some fires too myself. As a matter of fact, I burned a lot of brush myself just this very spring getting ready. And one thing about big fires is you need to feed them something, right? So one thing I end up burning is a lot of pallets, and Paul Capaldi is going to beat me up for doing that because he likes to make furniture out of pallets. When you like just throw a fresh pallet on to a fire, you pick up people leave them on the side of the road around where I live. You can get flames from that one pallet that are 8 feet high, but that doesn't last very long. Maybe lasts 5 or 10 minutes, and you have to feed it with something else. What was you'd think if you saw a fire that big, you'd see a lot of stuff around the fire pit that you're using to sort of create that big old flame. We know that he had some brush from Redant. He made a deal. Stephen made a deal with Redant that if you cut my brush down, I'll burn my brush and your brush, the scrub brush, and that that freshly cut brush tends to be a little bit green and doesn't actually burn as smoothly as you like. So where he got that the fuel from to do this burning is beyond me. Right, the state has not provided a very accurate, a very adequate explanation of where all the fuel came from to make a fire that big. It would have to be there. It would be so evident you'd have to see it. There'd have to be so much of it to keep it that big for that long.
That's a very good point, Big Jeff. And this is what frustrated the investigators and people looking at the burn pit area, and that there was definitely a lack of fuel. Right? Yes, okay, you can have some tires that you can burn, but you're not going to get a consistently high fire being 8 to 10 feet high. And Big Jeff is correct. Every time Scott Tadich was interviewed and asked about the fire grew in height, right? And it's quite clear that Scott Tadich was coached by Mr. Kratz, because you could tell that later on, as we'll see, that when Strang puts a document in front of him saying, well, the very first time you said that the fire was about 2 or 3 feet high, and he goes, oh, okay. So it's really bizarre because we discussed this, and I remember Barb Tadich was in chat, and she goes that there's no way that the fire was that tall, because if the fire was huge and a lot of tires were being used, what used to happen is that soot and residue ended up on the side of Barb's house. And she complained to Steve about the use of tires. Clearly, there was no soot, even on Stephen Avery's own garage, on the dog kennel. And if there's a big, great whopping fire, there just happens to be a massive propane tank very close to the burn pit. And I'm sure Big Jeff will tell us that that's not really a smart idea to have a massive whopping fire when you literally have a bomb right next to the burn pit. That's quite silly.
When I watched Scott on the stand and his testimony, all I get from it is, I don't think Scott had anything to do with it. I really don't. But what I see is there is inconsistencies, and there is something there that it kind of makes you go, why? Why are you talking a little bit of shit for? I personally think it was to be the martyr, to be not the hero. I've got to be careful with the words, but he wanted to be the good guy for the cops. I don't know why, whether it was pleasing, just so I don't know how to explain it. It's just how I interpret it. He wanted to be the hero. He wanted to be the helpful man, the yes man, the look at me, I'm doing justice. Whether that's because he believed Stephen had done it, so he was just helping them, in his opinion, catch the real guy, or whether he just wanted his 15 minutes of fame for whatever reason. I don't know. I just don't look at it like a guilty man. I'm looking at it like a man that has something that needed his ego, an ego booster, and he was getting it because look at me, I'm the hero. I witnessed something. That's just my opinion. The other thing that a lot of people over the years have touched base on is the whole Bobby and him waving at each other. Now, I have spoken to Jess and Justin, who recently went out there and did the drive and did the whole route thing and wanted to follow the footsteps on everything that we know about the case. And the first thing I said was, hey, question, is it possible that if they passed each other, they would have waved and saw each other? Both of them actually said up until that moment, they did not believe it, but they didn't really understand it until they did it, and said, absolutely, you would absolutely see them and be able to wave. That story in itself is now more plausible and possible to them. I remember having a conversation with Jeff Jones about this, and Jeff, you might be able to bring in your experiences about this waving and how the area is possible. But I just wanted to touch base on that. Like, I don't see that being, there's no need for that fabrication unless they both had discussed it prior. There is no indication that they had done that, and there is no indication that they were even friends. So there's this conspiracy or this thought that potentially Bobby and Scott did it. There is absolutely no evidence at this time that I've ever seen that there was any kind of relationship between these two, that this man would go out of his way and help this young kid cover a crime that he didn't either commit or wasn't a part of. Whether he was dating his mum or not, that's a bit of a stretch for me. If my daughter's boy, or if my let's say my husband's son came to me that wasn't mine and said to me, oh, listen, I've just killed someone, help me. I'd say, fuck along, mate. Go see your own mother. Like, you're dreaming if you think I'm going to get involved in this shit. That's a huge, huge thing to cover as a stepdad or a step parent, as no matter how much you love that parent or the parent of the child, that your partner. Again, this is just me because that's my thoughts. Everyone else is different and I respect it. That's just how I see Scott on the stand.
Absolutely. In my experience, you can see people driving down the road, and you do see your friends and acquaintances passing each other on the road, and you wave, and it is part of local culture. And that's why I always say that this becomes somewhat of a coin flip for me. Could it have been fabricated? Yeah, it could have been fabricated, and it sounds like a legit story because I know, but could it be real? You know, both could be true, and that's why I think this one, for me, is just going to be a coin toss.
Correct. But you can see how both of them potentially can make perfect Denny's, right? Because from a timing perspective, both Bobby and also Scott Tadich were around the same place and geolocation as Teresa Hallbach. So you can easily see how you can drum up a conspiracy here, or their potential involvement, right? It doesn't take a stretch in order to do it.
That's fair, but when you've got to think it through, and you've got to go beyond that, and that is Scott, in terms of alibi later on, is pretty secure. He was with Barb, and you got to bring it all in. Like, was he there around the same time passing the area? Yes, he was. Does that fit him into a Denny? Well, location does, but there's two other prongs to it. And does he fit it? Not really, because motive, what motive? There's not even any indication at all they've ever even met. There is no indication he's ever had communication from her. So does Denny really fit for Scott? But just being the fact that he was in a same location? No. In my opinion, no, because you've still got two other prongs that he doesn't fit, because there is no proof at all that he had ever met her. He knew what she looked like. There's no even proof he knew she was going out there that day. For him to be coming back from whatever area, from visiting his mum or whatever story it was, that it'd have to be the biggest coincidence that they crossed paths, and it just happened to be that he killed a girl that just left the Stephen Avery salvage yard if he was responsible, and yet had no idea she had been going out there that day. So Scott doesn't really, in my opinion, make a dent. He makes a Denny in a conspiracy after the fact, if you want to allude that Bobby might have done it and that he maybe helped in some way. But even that, for me, I can't find the balance, because a lot of them all say the same thing. There was no relationship at that stage. No one really knew Scott. He wasn't going to the house much. Barb was going to him because it was, from the sounds of it, there was a bit of a under the cover romance there for a while behind Tom Yander's back, and the boys were pissed with that. So there was a bit of a iffy line. You hear him say, I didn't really have a relationship with the boys. Barb's been very vocal with that. There was, at that stage, there wasn't really much going on from the perspective. I was keeping it quiet, private. And then you have the boys themselves say, fuck Scott, basically. We didn't like him. We didn't know him. They all kind of attest to that. So there is no three prongs for Scott. There really isn't. You really have to break it down. Does he have the three prongs of Denny? Besides the location, potentially, because of the time period, no, he doesn't. He really doesn't. You've got to be real about that. Bobby, on the other hand, yes, he fits all three prongs. He witnessed her being out there. He was in the location. He had all of it. Motive, opportunity, and proximity. Scott doesn't.
If this alibying each other testimony was not available, in other words, Bobby had obviously left the salvage yard, and what, in your opinion, would anything have changed if this self-alibying event did not take place? Kelly, would it have changed your mind as Bobby Dassey being a Denny, or what?
As in terms of seeing Scott?
That's correct.
No, it wouldn't have changed anything. Honestly, if Scott never even entered the picture and that there was a wave down or anything, this would not have at all changed or made me think otherwise, because I don't see it being really that significant, because at the end of the day, I can also bounce back what Jeff Jones just said. Bobby could have already committed the crime, and by passing Scott Tadich, the crime could have been already committed, or for all we know, and this is really big speculation, but just trying to put it in perspective, for all we knew, it all could be true. He saw Bobby, Bobby waved, he waved, but Teresa was laying in the backseat of his car. You just don't know. And that doesn't make Scott any more guilty than Bobby being any more being the person that did it. If Scott didn't come into this equation, I still don't think it would have changed anything. I think what has changed for everyone with Scott is the fact that Stephen Avery, over 10 years later, inserted Scott into the narrative with Kathleen. And I know people go to me, no, this is realistic. Not once did anyone ever put Scott Tadich on the Avery Savage Yard at all in the day. No testimony, no narrative of him ever being there, until Kathleen came in and she got Stephen to recall his memory of that day. Over 10 years, my apology, it was over 10 years later, all of a sudden, he remembers Scott being there at midday seeing his car. That, for me, I think, as an outsider, when you review all the cases, that hurts Stephen. Not because I think he's deliberately lying. I just think that he's pushing something because, he didn't do it. And when you didn't do it, you don't grasp at straws, but you try to make something work. Anyone but you. And it's fair, but I think that hurts him, because then it looks like he's deliberately then lying, because nowhere ever prior to Kathleen or him already remembering something was that even a thing. And I think we have to be careful with that, because, we can't have it both ways with Stephen. He's claiming he doesn't even remember that there was a fire on the 31st for a while, okay? He doesn't remember a lot of things, and we all accept that. And when we go to defense, half the time, that is our defense as community truthers. We're like, with the guilters, you're giving the guy too much credit. He didn't remember half the shit. Every day was all blurry. And then you have him. So we're all trying to believe that this man that we use as a defense for him, that he doesn't remember stuff. So he might have made mistakes early by not remembering a fire or what day it was. But then we're contradicting ourselves by then backing up the fact that, oh, yep, Scott was on that property because Steven said it 10 years later because now he remembers. Well, which one is it? This is what the guilt has come on hard with us. Well, which one is it? Is it he remembers everything and it just takes a little bit of Kathleen powder to sprinkle over him to give him a memory? Or does he not remember shit? Because in his early interviews, Scott was never a part of that narrative, and he was very consistent early in his narrative of what happened that day. So we have to be really careful with Scott because it muddies the water, because by adding Scott into it, you have to take in all these other factors, what it would mean. And I personally just don't think Scott had anything to do with it. I'm going to say, for me, the initial crime itself, whether he became aware of it later, that's up for speculation. I personally don't think Scott has anything to do with it. And I think it's fair to say that he's got a pretty tight alibi for that night. He was with Barb. Unless Barb's involved, they were together. He had someone sitting with him a majority of the night. We hear her leaving the house. That's much my thoughts on the matter. But no, Silkman, in terms of your question, I don't think that would have changed anything for me at all.
Okay, excellent. And ultimately, at the end of the day, forensically, there's nothing that links Teresa Horbach to either Bobby or Scott Tadich, right? We've got to keep that in mind. And, we've all seen the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, right? You make a statement and straight away you're going to be shut down as terms of hearsay. So in other words, a lot of this material simply could not be admitted in a court of law because it's hearsay. So unless you've got hard documented proof, you're going to be in big trouble. So, you have to look at this case in a much more simplistic level, right? If you rule Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadich out, then it has to mean that if Teresa Horbach had left the Avery salvage yard, it was somebody else, another third party that we can't point a finger at the moment, because forensically we don't have anything, except we actually do. We have A23, right? And potentially A23 could be the most important piece of forensic evidence that the state do not want to talk about.
A23 could be our Gregory Allen of the case. It could be that simple.
Oh, correct. Absolutely correct. The so-called pubic hair for 2005.
So I mean, just on this topic again, it's important to say that when we go to identify somebody as a Denny suspect, it doesn't mean that if the primary defendant, who in this case is Stephen Avery, is exonerated because of the existence of a Denny, that the Denny is hauled away in handcuffs in the next second. Being denied a Denny suspect in your trial is a violation of your constitutional rights, that you had the right to name somebody, and during the trial to give the jury the alternative perspective that there was another person with a name that could have committed this crime, that wasn't the defendant, and it's your constitutional right, if they meet the prongs. I'm not disagreeing with that. To be able to say that. So calling out somebody like Bobby potentially as a Denny does not necessarily even mean that you think that he's guilty. It means that somebody was denied their constitutional rights during a trial, and when that happens, the trial is deemed fundamentally flawed, and you get a new one. So with that being said, why is it that the time of day that Scott and Bobby passed each other was so important?
Correct. And I agree, Big Jeff, because what you're looking at here, in my opinion, is criteria. So, in other words, why is it that Stephen Avery can be accused of murdering Teresa Halbach, but an alternative suspect like potentially Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadich, not saying they had any involvement? I'm talking about criteria and finger pointing. So, in other words, what is the difference between Stephen Avery, Bobby Dassey, and Scott Tadich? And the answer is actually very simple: forensic evidence, right? The forensic evidence points towards Stephen Avery. Even though it's circumstantial evidence, you don't find any circumstantial evidence per se against Bobby nor Scott Tadich. So
Right.
if you're going to plant forensic evidence, you plant it so it points towards one person and one person only, which means that the planter planted forensic evidence so that you look at exclusively at Stephen Avery. That to me is the fundamental difference in this particular case, the forensic evidence.
And that's right, Dr. Silkman. That's why I get what Big Jeff is saying, the constitutional rights of Denny, but that's why there was no constitutional rights problem in this case, because Denny didn't override the forensic evidence. So that actually wasn't a part of the case. It was a hearing on it, and it was ruled that it wasn't violating anything because Denny couldn't be heard in this case because forensic, when you read all the motions to it and what Ken Karatz did in the cases he cited to it, it said very clearly, basically, that your Denny, you have a legal right to fight Denny, but in this case, it doesn't match it. It doesn't have the criteria to it. So constitutionally, it wasn't violated in it because it was ruled out by the court that, hey, I can't rule Denny in this one because the forensic evidence is so directed at just one person. It contradicts the Denny argument. You can't do it. That's the truth of it. That's why they had the motions. That's why they had the hearing on Denny. It didn't violate because the forensic evidence pointed to one person in this case. One. Unless they were going to say Denny matches a co-conspirator, there was nowhere to go with Denny. There was no Denny in the case. They made sure of that.
Yeah, well, that's dumb. So they suppressed the evidence of the Veely CD so that they could do that. But my question to the panel is, what is the significance of the time? Why is this testimony that they passed each other at this particular time even relevant? Why are they going into it? Why is it a matter for the trial?
Well, they would probably argue just timeline. They just want to set up a timeline, but for them, I think it's more alibi. They want Stephen Avery to be left at the Avery salvage yard alone. So he was alone doing whatever acts he was doing, where these two were then seen out bypassing each other. So that's their alibi that, hey, listen, we've got two guys that are driving, can't be committing any crime because they're driving, versus Stephen Avery, who's home alone, and Teresa had just been there. Do the maths. I think that's the perception they want us to see.
And if all of a sudden that timeline changes by 15 minutes, half an hour, then what?
I think the same rule would apply. The fact that the area of concern, or the timeline on the time frame of the crime, was going into when Brendan Dassey was home. So
we have a very accurate time hack. We have a very accurate time hack for when Teresa Halbach enters the Avery salvage yard, right?
Yes.
So if all of a sudden that passing on 147 happens half an hour later than they're saying it did right now, how do you account for that time that Bobby says, I left and I passed Scott. If it was really half an hour after he said that does he have to change his story, to account for that half an hour?
I don't think so, because at the end of the day, it's the time frame they gave us. As the time frame was, we know she arrived, in Stephen's timeline, she arrived by 2:35. That's the time frame he's now put it to. He had given us his original time frame was different. He ended up, when Kathleen came into the picture and she got him to review times and phone calls again, he then changed it and extended the time frame for her to be there later. So we got to look at it like this. If she arrived at 2:35 going on what we know now, which is what he's saying, and she left within a few minutes, and then she left by the time the 2:41 frame call came, and Bobby's saying that he saw Scott at 3 o'clock. How does that change anything for really anyone in terms of what could have or could not have already happened? And that even falls in for Stephen Avery, and Bobby. If the crime had already been committed, it doesn't change the timeline for that specific time for anybody, because for all we know, the crime has already happened in that short amount of space of that half an hour. So to me, it changes nothing. Really.
Do you not believe Stephen when he came out of his trailer that Bobby's truck was gone?
Oh, I believe it was. I believe him 100%. I believe.
So if his truck is gone and you shift the timeline by half an hour, doesn't Bobby have some explaining to do with some missing time?
Not really, because we have Bobby's phone call thing. He's making active phone calls in the same argument could be said when we're all sitting there going, how could Stephen Avery be committing this crime? He's on the phone call with Jody at crucial times when certain events are meant to be happening. Well, I can apply that same theory for Bobby Dassey when he's making phone calls when he's actively meant to be in the middle of a significant crime.
You're not following my argument, though, is that if Bobby's timeline changes, then he's got to change his story. People who have to change their story are suspicious. You said this originally, and now it's this. That's suspicious. So,
but then that argument could go for Stephen Avery. Look how many times
that's fine. Stephen Avery's in prison. So
I know, but what I'm trying to say is the fact that we don't know. This is the problem. We don't.
I'm not trying to convince you, Kelly. I'm not trying to convince you that he's guilty. I'm trying to convince you that the story that they're telling right now, we're going to find out in about 50 seconds when we let it play, that story is different than the one that they're telling right now. And that in and of itself is suspicious, and it doesn't match what Stephen says when he came out of the trailer that the truck was gone. We have a very accurate time hack of when Teresa went into the Avery salvage yard. So in order for that to be true and for Bobby to be where he says he was, then just the timeline that they're trying to put forward right now doesn't add up yet. A large number of things that don't add up about the state's case. But here's yet another thing, and I'm saying question it. Question it.
Absolutely. But respectfully, you hit the nail on the head. We have a timestamp of when Teresa went in. The truth of the matter and the honest truth is we don't have a timestamp of if and when she exited, if she even did. That's the problem. It doesn't. Yeah, everyone's story changed, and I agree. Bobby does it. Something changes, and I'm going to be the first to admit it. Something doesn't sit right, but does it change everything? Because if you twerk Stephen's timeline, it's like a ripple effect. It's a butterfly effect. Then you have to ripple everybody's as well, because this entire crime was based on Stephen Avery's timeline. Everyone else has got put into it because they had to fill the gaps. So whether it was off 15 minutes to 10 minutes, at the end of the day, the baseline is Stephen Avery's. So it's hard for me to sit here, and I agree, they change it, and I agree, I know they did. But does that mean any more guilt than anyone else? No, it doesn't, because we're basing it off Stephen Avery's timeline. Everyone else is adjusted to that. What if Stephen Avery's is off for 15 minutes? How does that then butterfly into Bobby's? Because everyone it was the state that created it, not everyone else. They just had to clean it up. So do we blame Bobby for this more, or do we blame the state for creating a timeline that Bobby had to fit it into? That's what we have to ask ourselves as well.
Either way, it's a lie. Right? If the state created a false timeline or if Bobby created a false timeline, it doesn't matter. It's false.
It very well could be.
could
But
be,
we'll have to come back to this discussion as we get back to the video at hand, and this discussion is going to continue because we're just going to see more of this testimony. So without any further ado, let's get back to the video.
Did you see Stephen Avery standing next to or near that fire?
Yes, I did.
You remember October 31, 2005 because you skipped work entirely that day.
I didn't skip work. I took vacation that day to go be with my mother.
Other than your mother, who would have seen you on October 31st before you say Bobby Dassey saw you as the two of you drive past one another on Highway 147?
Nobody, just I went from the hospital to my trailer.
You get home, you very quickly get ready to go off deer hunting.
Yes,
On your way to hunting is when you see Bobby Dassey.
correct.
And you got home from the hospital at about 3:15 that afternoon, you say, to your home?
No, I got home from the hospital between 2:30 and 2:45.
And that's your recollection today, 15, 16 months after the events?
Yes,
All right. Remember talking to a couple of law enforcement officers about this back on November 29, 2005?
yes.
And do you remember what you told them then about when you got home from the hospital?
No, I don't recall.
So you exhibit 356, which is a Division of Criminal Investigation report. The second paragraph may be the most helpful, but you're welcome to read to yourself any or all of that report. Did that help refresh your recollection?
Yeah, it did.
Did you tell the police on November 29 that you arrived home at 3:15?
I may have.
Well, do you remember telling them that or not?
No, I don't remember telling them that. It's been such a long time.
Do you think maybe your recollection back on November 29, 2005 was maybe a little better than it is today?
Yeah.
It was just 1 month after the events in question at that point.
Right.
Was November 29 also the day that you told the police that the flames were 3 feet high?
Must have.
And sometime around the time you talked to Investigator Dietering, on the occasion you just described, were you trying to sell one of the Dassey boys' 22s to a man named Jay Mathis at work?
No.
You weren't. You had, I think, said that on Halloween you see Miss Halbach walking towards your Uncle Stephen's trailer.
Yes,
Not too long after that, you leave the house with your bow to go hunting.
yes,
As you drove off then to go deer hunting, it's what, 2:45 or 3, somewhere in that
yes,
range? Anybody see you
Yes.
as you're going hunting? Who?
Scott Todick,
Scott Todick?
yes,
Okay. What you told Investigator Dietering is that Mr. Todick would be able to verify precisely what time he had seen you?
yes.
Why did you think that?
Maybe he looked at his clock in his truck.
Had you talked with Mr. Todick about whether he could verify precisely when he saw you?
No,
You were just hoping or guessing that maybe he could?
yes,
We had two people who alibied only themselves. They alibied each other. Nobody else saw them during this critical time period. They were on the property. They had access. One of them was directly contradicted by an independent witness as to the critical time of when she was supposedly last seen.
What time did you find that you got to the end of Avery Road where you would drop the Dassey boys off?
Between 3:30 and 3:40.
Between 3:30 and 3:40?
Yes.
And how do you know that?
Because it was about the same time every day, same route.
Okay. During the week that began on Monday, October 31, 2005, do you remember seeing anything that, you remembered later when you dropped the Dassey boys off one day that week?
I remember seeing a woman taking photographs,
Could you tell what the woman was taking photographs of?
a van,
Okay, so and again, that would have been about when? What time of day?
3:30. I'm sorry, 3:30 to 3:40.
That's all I have. Thank you.
And I assume you're trying to sort of poke holes in the state's timeline. Is that what that was all about?
The implicit premise in your question is that the state has a timeline and we're sitting poking holes. I think this is the most reliable person to offer a timeline. She is not connected to any of the parties. She, as a matter of employment, had a very good reason to know what the time was within about a 10-minute window. And I'm surprised that it's the defense who had to call this witness to try to establish a reliable idea about time.
Was this something worth going after? To use the fish analogy, was this a fish that they could ever even catch?
Well, put it this way. They really, really got this wrong, big time. Because what the state were what the defense were trying to imply here was that Teresa Horbach was actually seen by the bus driver at about 3:45. That's clearly not the case. And I've gone into this, Big Jeff, Kelly has gone into this. This actually was quite tragic because the defense believed that Teresa Horbach was out there at 3:45 taking pictures of vehicles. There's no way that the bus driver was able to see Teresa Horbach near Stephen Avery's property taking photographs of anything. Unfortunately, she got the day wrong, and she couldn't even remember whether it was that particular day or week in which she had seen the female photographer. And the reason why this is so devastating is because Brendan Dassey had changed his recollections the moment he was challenged by Detective O'Neill saying, "Hey, come on, Brendan, everybody on the bus," he implied it, everybody on the bus and the bus driver saw a female photographer. That means, why didn't you see that female photographer? As a consequence of that, Brendan changed his recollections from saying, "I didn't see anybody, me and my brother didn't see anybody," to then admitting first that he stood on the side of the road, and Big Jeff will back me up, and allowed Teresa Horbach to drive right past him and his brother as she left the Avery salvage yard, to which Detective O'Neill said, "No, you're wrong, she never left," to then admitting that Brendan had seen Stephen, Teresa, and the Toyota RAV4 at 3:45, which was completely ludicrous.
And just to really drive that home of how, the discussion me and Big Jeff was just saying, this is what I'm talking about in terms of the timeline. And like Dr. Silkman said, how devastating what they just said here and the big fuck up, because they're just alluding that Scott and Bobby are potentially talking shit about their timeline because they could have been there and they had opportunity and whatever. Yet he's sitting here right now and talking about another 45 odd minutes later that Teresa was still alive. So that means that Scott and Bobby passing each other means nothing to the case because the crime hasn't even happened yet because she's still alive at this stage. So your waving means nothing. The fact that Bobby left 15 minutes now means nothing because right now Dean's saying she's still alive at 3:45.
That's 100% correct. So you've got this ridiculous situation whereby you're trying to rule Bobby Dassey in and Scott Tadich in, and now you've got the actual defense saying, "Nah, that can't be right because she's still alive at 3:45, right?" And so both events are mutually exclusive because then that doesn't explain if Stephen Avery had come out at 3:45. How can he now account for the fact that he's seen Bobby Dassey leave, right? So the whole thing doesn't make any sense. And if I could just drop in my 2 cents worth here, don't forget, John LeQuern was the propane tank driver. And the propane tanks where he was right at the end of the Avery Road, right at the end. And he admitted seeing a vehicle that fitted Teresa Horbach's description. But when he saw that vehicle, he never saw the school bus driver drive into the property. So therefore, either his time is out by at least an hour, right? And I believe at that time in Wisconsin, they changed the clock time. I could be wrong about that. But if that's the case, then potentially he could have seen Teresa Horbach's vehicle leave at approximately 2:45. That makes perfect sense because John LeQuern never saw the bus driver drive in. So here we have this bizarre situation of timelines. You're trying to rule Bobby Dassey in, Scott Tadich in, but then you now present evidence that no, she was alive at 3:45, completely making a mockery of Bobby Dassey and Scott Tadich, right? I agree with you, Kelly. It really is a mess.
Except that the time doesn't fit with their theory.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. The time doesn't fit with their Brendan Dassey theory. I don't know that they've actually said when this all happened. They did say during the whole Dassey, scenario that he got off the bus, he got the mail, rode over, and could hear the screams, and this really is a problem for that.
Bobby Dassey testified here that at about 2:45 in the afternoon, he sees the female photographer out the window, and she appears to be taking photographs, and then sees her walking towards Mr. Avery's trailer, takes a shower, doesn't see her afterward.
How does this help Steve Avery? I mean, if what this defense said, what the prosecution says happened an hour later. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I mean, standing alone outside of the Brendan Dassey.
Listen to the argument that Mr. Kratz made on why he thinks that charge, false imprisonment, shouldn't be dismissed. What was it based primarily on? One witness, Bobby Dassey. This witness today, with no interest whatsoever, has a completely different timeline that would not fit Mr. Dassey.
The evidence don't make no sense. If the state ain't got to prove nothing, an innocent person always got to prove himself. And how do you prove the sheriff's department's doing something? I got a hunch that's going to be hard to do.
The evidence don't make no sense. And if the cops set me up, it's going to be pretty hard to prove.
Correct, because unfortunately, there's no test for planting, right? So the only way you're going to uncover the planting is that when you examine the forensic evidence, it doesn't make any sense. I believe that there is evidence of that because the DNA levels on the key, on the bullet, and on the hood latch swab make no sense whatsoever, right? We've discussed that. But the only way you're going to prove this is if the planter admits to the planting scenario. And so this is a very, very difficult situation. I agree with Big Jeff and Kelly. The timelines that have been introduced really only cloud the issue. They don't resolve anything. And there's also another big problem, of course, is that if you look at the cell phone tower pings, Big Jeff will talk more about this. We know that after 2:41 p.m., there's no more cellular activity on Teresa Horbach's phone. So if something happened to her, and if we're following the timeline of Teresa Horbach leaving the Avery salvage yard, it meant that she would have been attacked quickly as she left. something happened to her. If we're taking into account the inactivity on the mobile phone, something occurred to her very, very quickly. What do you think, guys?
I tend to agree with that.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right about that. It's funny that she doesn't even get any incoming calls either, right? When you talk about cellular activity, I don't think she gets another call that day,
That's
which
correct.
which is awfully strange on a holiday or a party day like Halloween. So
Correct.
That's I don't know how to get around that other than she had another phone. There's no evidence of that, obviously.
Yeah, 241 seems to be the cutoff point, unless she had a burner phone.
Yep.
A secondary phone.
Yeah, and it's as we've said many times, I think, on this whole podcast, it's not so much the evidence that's there, but you pointed out several great examples, with the amount of DNA not making any sense. It's what's not there that doesn't make any sense as well. Where's the blood spatter? Where's the where's the evidence of a stabbing, a throat cutting, 10 shots, in the garage? What's not there is what makes no sense to me, in addition to the things that Dr. Silkman just mentioned that are there that make no sense.
And I think that's also very good proof in that the planter had no idea where Teresa Halbach was, in terms of like in the bedroom, in the garage. Whoever planted this forensic evidence had no idea what had happened to Teresa Halbach and where it took place. The most important piece, and we keep on saying it 1,000,001 times, guys, the most important thing was to make sure that someone found the RAV4. That's all that was required. Everything else is filling in the blanks.
No sane lawyer looks forward to presenting an argument to a jury that the police framed his client. No sane lawyer looks forward to doing that. The police, many people outside of large cities at least, are raised to believe are the good guys. And for many Americans, their experiences with the police essentially confirm the idea that the police are the good guys. So when you confront the need to present a defense that your client was framed, and worse yet, framed by law enforcement officers, you're not happy.
The doorway where he comes out.
One of the things the state argued was that it would have taken a wide-ranging conspiracy of so many people to pull this off, and that there's just no way this could be possible. But in fact, that's not true. Really, 2 people could have done this easily enough if they had the motive to do it. Maybe 1 even. And the whole argument, well, why would they risk doing this and risk getting caught? You have to understand, they probably would have no fear of ever being caught doing this. Who better than a police officer would know how to frame somebody?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give in the matter now before the court be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
James M. Lenk, L-E-N-K.
I like how they leave that in there.
Yeah.
Well, he's not the missing link because he's everywhere.
It's so funny how Jerry just said, people ask why would they risk, framing someone and that. And then when you now hear this new Bobby audio of the interview and Dietrich's having a whole spiel of, he's got family to feed and all that. This just shows that they were very well aware that this was going to become a thing, that they knew that law enforcement were going to be under the scope. So they were already crossing their T's and dotting their I's because they knew how it was looking. They knew the parts they played and they knew it would come into question because shit wasn't making sense.
100% correct.
Yeah.
100% correct. They knew that things were not adding up, right? Things were really, really bizarre here. So interesting that Deidre took the front foot and basically said to Bobby Dassey, come on, planting, conspiracy, that can't be the case, right? So they're now presenting this argument to a 19-year-old, right, who's under the gun, let's get it clear. This is November the 9th. Bobby Dassey still under the gun, under the pressure. And that basically, by using the read technique, had given him an out. Oh, so who do you think did this, Bobby? Who do you think put you in a jam? And yet, kudos to Bobby, he didn't point the finger at Stephen. In actual fact, I believe he even said he thought that law enforcement was involved. So, that's a very, very interesting thing.
Yeah, he actually says Manitowoc. He said, well, then who then? And he says Manitowoc. That is really
That's
brazen
correct.
comment to make, to say to another law enforcement officer, your brother in arms, your boys in blue could be responsible for this. This is what I think. And then you can hear that when they come back like, what? The tone changes again. They get more of the defensive tone. They had been, nicely preaching there, spilling their boxes off about, oh, it's not us. And then you hear that, hear him say, no Manitowoc. And then that tone change, like, what? And then it gets a bit harder, like, it would take 3 people to be in the know and 2 of them have to be dead. You hear that dynamic of their interview change. And you're right, Dr. Silkman, that when you go back and really listen to it, they use the read on Bobby in this. They're leading questions. They're leading. They're not interviewing him. They're interrogating him with leading questions to a degree. They're giving him very boxed in questions that they've already kind of answered it for him. So they just need him to repeat a yes or no back to them, but kind of hinting what they need back from him. Bobby is, and I have to say, he doesn't give it to them much. He gives them a little bit, but like I said to you before, he doesn't give the extra detail. They're looking for that little bit of extra detail. They definitely give him an out. They were definitely giving, I like the part where they said to him, if there's anything you have to tell us, it's as simple as us just flipping the page and rewriting it, just adding it. Not a problem.
Yep.
There's nothing anything you tell us now, it doesn't mean anything. That was an out for him. That was the read. That was, you see this strategic move in the Chris Watts thing when they give Chris Watts, I know this is comparing a bit of an apple and oranges here because of the dynamics of the crimes different, but the read itself is what I'm trying to point to. When you have them saying to him in Chris Watts, they gave him an alternative. Well, maybe you killed your wife because she had already hurt her babies and it was like a retaliation of anger. They said it kind of to Bobby that, your uncle has put you in a jam. We only have to turn a page and you can rewrite what you've already told us, because I would be pissed too if someone put me in a jam. They were alluding to him, it's okay to give us what we need. Let's flip the page and let's start again. They gave him an alternative narrative.
How many times do you think that they say, I mean, they can say whatever bullshit they want, right? So how many times do you think they said that to somebody? Let's take this situation out, because I'm not trying to say anything about Bobby, but let's just say a suspect say, if you remember anything, now's the time to say, I told you yesterday that I did this, but I actually ended up doing this first, and now you've changed your story, and then they go back and they act on that. That is nothing clear. Oh, okay, that's okay. You're good. They go back and they investigate that stuff. They're trying to get more out of you. They're trying to pull more information out of you, and they will 100% act on that information that you give them. And potentially even slap the cuffs on you if they if it ties to some piece of evidence that they already have. Oh, you can tell us, no problem. You'll be perfectly in the clear. Be perfectly fine. So just don't. If you're in that type of situation, get a lawyer, and number 2, don't change your story. That is high. That's a very suspicious thing to do. And next, the last thing on that topic, I think, is one sort of piece of the read technique, and you'll recognize it from Brendan's confession. How many times did Fassbender tell Brendan, "Oh, we already know everything. We just need to hear it from you," right?
Correct.
They say that to it's about, we are just a little bit of time away from knowing everything. So
Yep.
if you just don't know one thing, that doesn't match 100%, you better tell us right now. So we already know everything, right? So that's part of the a lot of like intelligence agencies kind of do that. Their biggest the biggest their biggest ruse is that you look at them and you think they know everything, when the fact of the matter is they hardly know anything, right?
Correct.
That's really that's their biggest ruse. You think they're everywhere, they're hardly anywhere. You think they know everything, they hardly know anything.
Correct. And I agree, Big Jeff. But essentially, what the investigators were doing at that point in time, they were saying, "Bobby, you guide the narrative. Where do you want this narrative to go?" Right? And Bobby understood quite clearly what they were trying to do. It didn't work for Bobby. However, unfortunately and tragically, it worked for Brendan Dassey. He basically gave them the narrative that they wanted to hear. They then used that narrative against him. And as we know, Brendan is sitting in prison. Bobby Dassey is not. Scott Tadich is not. Stephen and Brendan are sitting in prison, right? So it's disgusting that all those investigators were trying to do is to bring Bobby Dassey to get his fingerprints and a buccal swab and photography. They were basically saying to Bobby, we turn the page, we can start again, guide the narrative. Who do you want to point a finger to? And that's why I've changed my mind on Bobby. Bobby never broke down and said, "Yep, it was my uncle. Had to be my uncle." So, kudos to him for doing that.
And I think that's why I struggle with the narrative that Kathleen's going for at the moment. I get it, but that it's these little moments back in the beginning that just makes me not. Kathleen walks me to the line every time with Bobby as the suspect. She walks me to the line, but I can't cross it. I just can't jump over it. Being the fact that these little moments that we're now getting, it's that simple fact that he had an opportunity. If he had spent all this time framing his uncle, and we're talking about allegedly now running around with his blood just a plant. If he had spent all this time framing his uncle, and the opportunity is now in his face to finally drive that home, finish him off. You've done all the hard work. All you have to do is give them that narrative they want. That's all they want, because if you've done it, you've done the rest, yet he doesn't take it. Why wouldn't you take it? The last thing you'd want if you are responsible is to be looked at as a co-conspirator or a sole suspect.
That's a good point.
Why would you do that? Why would you not take that moment? There was their time. We can rewrite what you said, and you can drive it home. Don't look at anyone else but my uncle. I've done the hard works for you. Fucking get on with it. But he doesn't take it. He doesn't take it. In fact, instead, he turns around and says, Manitowoc. What the fuck? That is next level, like, beyond. That makes me, you know how I said Kathleen walks me up to the line? When I heard that, I won't lie, I took 10 steps straight back from that line, because I'm like, wow. There was his opportunity to say, okay, maybe Stephen Avery. But when he said to them, Manitowoc could have done it or had a part in this planting, I walked straight back from that line. I'm like, Kathleen, you have to walk me back, because he just stepped me back 10.
Correct. And don't forget, sorry, Big Jeff, if I could just quickly add, don't forget that there was a lot of parts that we heard on the tape that were never in the report. So that's why if you just read the report, you get a totally different perspective until you listen to the tape. A lot of this stuff that was discussed between the officers and also Bobby Dassey never made it into the report. So This is incredible. Here was a chance. They gave him a chance to point the finger at Stephen. He didn't. And by doing so, he now put the spotlight back on himself as a potential suspect or as a potential co-conspirator. That takes a lot of guts to do that, guys, because he could have cleared his name then and right there. But he now left it open. And Kathleen Zellner, unfortunately, for Bobby, has pounced on that.
Well, my fear is that Kathleen Zellner doesn't have too many arrows left in her quiver. To me, it is after 18 years now, that there's just not a lot of that there's not a lot of evidence left to be found. What evidence there may have been by the real killer is long gone. So we're probably looking at, if Stephen gets a new trial, it'll be because of a technicality. The probability that she can solve the case after all this time, after so much planting and burying, and we don't know where the crime ended and the frame up began. That Kathleen Zellner's best chance is some level of technicality to get Stephen freed. To me, I'm past trying to solve the case, and I've been past trying to solve the case for a long time, and just trying to point out the sort of the injustices. And if Stephen gets a new trial based on a technicality, I'll be very happy for Stephen that day, and won't shed a tear for people who perceive that as an injustice.
Well said, Big Jeff. Well said. And I have to agree. Everything you said, I think we're all feeling it. I think, and that's what I've been saying a lot in the podcasts lately when I do go into a chat discussion, and I say to people, I think, like you said, Big Jeff, you get past trying to solve the case anymore, because I think in fairness and rationality, we're all accepting that none of us are going to solve the case because we don't have all the pieces. We've never had all the pieces in the first place, whether they were destroyed or they were just not present at the beginning. And I think for me, I struggle with the fact that, they've raised the bar for Kathleen. It's not about her even solving the case anymore. They've made that very, very clear. They're basically saying to her, and I know this is going to probably be like, oh, you've said it so many times, but this is the importance of where we're at now. She doesn't have to just prove someone else did it. She doesn't. She now also has to prove not only did they do it, but my client didn't. So she does have two bars now, because you can't add someone without eliminating. And she has to try to find a way to eliminate Stephen Avery. And if we go back by the ruling of the Courts of Appeal, they made it very clear in black and white. They actually say it in the Bones problem. Your experts present a really strong and excellent argument. They really do. Your experts take us to the line, but they don't cross it, because in the crossing that line, they have to provide proof that your client wasn't responsible for doing moving the bones, or had anything to do with the bones. Your experts don't give us that conclusion. And that's what they're saying to Kathleen now. Prove then who did it, and prove that your client didn't have anything to do with it. That is really, really high bar. And a lot of people are like, that's unfair. That's not how it should be. I agree. That's not how it should be. And that isn't fair. But that's the justice system. They make these laws so tight that people that really do commit really horrendous and cruel and nasty crimes don't get out. Unfortunately, the innocent people then get locked into that spiral circle, and they get stuck in it. Is it fair? No, it's not. But is this how the justice system is? Yes. Can we fix it? No.
No,
we can't. We really
chance.
can't. No chance. It's been a rule that's been written for years. It's a rule that they follow. It's a rule that they all abide by. And our voices only echo in a room that we're all standing in. They're not hearing it.
Correct, because at the end of the day, it's about protecting the verdicts, right? There's no way that they want to do a whole brand new trial, because millions of dollars have been spent. They just basically see it as wasting time. So they've set the bar extremely high. So no matter if human remains were found in another county, if those remains belong to Teresa Hallbach, Stephen Avery has to prove that it wasn't him going on a driving expedition, dumping cremains off the side of his car, right? That's how ridiculous it now is, because Kathleen Zellner has presented all this evidence to say, hey, wait a minute, there are burnt human cremains in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. What the hell are they doing there? What does the state turn around and say? Well, how can you prove that it wasn't Stephen or Brendan that dumped them there? So no matter how ludicrous it is, they're going to win. They will win. Their argument, how are you going to overturn their argument? The only way you're going to overturn it is to actually find the pair of hands that put those cremains there that didn't belong to Stephen nor Brendan.
Agreed. And I think that also comes down to where we're at now. We all are aware that she's going to go back into the Denny argument. We know that's, in fairness, that's all she was really kind of left with after her motion was denied, even by courts of appeal, which I hate to say it, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and I'm not trying to put bad energy out there, but I'm just realistic. And if no one has worked that out by now, then someone hasn't been listening. The realisticness of this is her strongest points were in that motion. They really were. She hit some fucking home runs with the bone argument, in my opinion, the valet CD. Like, she had the most strongest technicalities, which Big Jeff was talking about. Those were the moments that she really had, in my opinion, had a home run straight up, but it still wasn't enough. So what fears me the most is, if that wasn't enough, how can Denny be enough when Denny, and goes back to what I was saying, Denny is great for Bobby, and let's say Bobby did it, but how is she going to prove that Bobby and Stephen didn't do it together, when you would then open up the can of worms where they were both in the same proximity, they were both there at the same time, and then prove that they didn't do it together is the problem with Denny. That's what her problem is going to be. It's adding someone to eliminate someone, and it's not just someone, because like Dr. Silkman just said, it's protecting the conviction now. It is. So, and it's not just Stephen, because then we have Brendan Dassey as well. So, they're going to be like, fuck, we're not going to. Do you honestly think, and this is for the panel and the people in discussion, do we honestly believe they would trade Bobby Dassey for Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey? Because by doing that, they would have to admit, one, they got it very wrong. Two, they would have to admit that a 19-year-old was able to fool everybody, that they didn't pick up that he had planted stuff underneath their noses, and they didn't, and three, they were basically incompetent because they didn't realize and do an efficient job to realize shit wasn't making sense. So do you guys think that they would do that?
No chance.
Well, again, it's not a trade, though, right? I mean, you say it as if the inclusion of a Denny suspect that gives Stephen a new trial means that if Stephen's innocent, that the Denny suspect gets the cuffs clapped on him. That's not the way it is. So I don't think that they would make that trade, but I'm not sure that's the trade that's on the table. I think that I 100% agree that Kathleen hit a lot of home runs. And let's just say a lot of those home runs she hit, the Court of Appeals didn't say you don't have a point. They didn't even say you don't have an excellent point. As a matter of fact, what they did say was you are procedurally barred, meaning that you can't bring this up again because you dropped it in the pro se. It was not any it was not any relation to the quality of the argument. It was a legalistic tactic, and Kathleen screwed up when she dropped the pro se, and that procedural bar has nothing to do with the merit of the argument. So
She did.
it's
She dropped the ball.
she dropped. I don't know, her or her. And I know I'm gonna get hate now from the people who think Kathleen can do no wrong.
And no disrespect
Come on,
for
Jeff.
the people. It's no disrespect for the people, but for the people that would bring you hate, Big Jeff, are the people that clearly don't understand it, because the understanding of it, there shouldn't be hate. It's not your fault for calling out the truth. And the truth is exactly what you said. She dropped the ball. She got herself procedurally barred. It hurt her case big time. That's the truth. And if you understand it, there shouldn't be hate, because you're just telling it how it is.
I appreciate that, and that's why, to me, this procedural bar is essentially a legal tactic, right? There's no reason, if you listen to Tracy Strunzi, she said, it would have been very simple for Kathleen to go to the court and say, can I incorporate the current pro se with the argument that I want to make, and they would have said yes. But she didn't do that. She dropped the pro se and then said, well, he's indigent, so I'm just going to incorporate this into my argument. That's not the way she handled it. It was she made maybe a rookie legal mistake there. Maybe she just wasn't familiar with the way things worked in Wisconsin. But they tossed out a lot of really good, strong arguments of why the trial itself was fundamentally unfair, right? That Stephen's constitutional rights were violated on a legal tactic, and this legal tactic is the procedural bar based on the mistake of his lawyer. So when people come and they say, oh well, I want to really hold the, I'm like, fuck that. Stephen deserves a new trial because they fucked him over royally with the bullshit that they pulled from everything. So I'm not going to give anybody much sympathy about anything. So that's where I sit. Maybe I'm in a foul mood today, so I apologize if I'm
Come on, you. No,
I'm usually a happy person.
That's correct, but I do agree. I do agree with the panel. Just because it's Kathleen's on, and I have the utmost respect for her. Even a top attorney can make errors, right? Because things have to be done in a particular manner, especially in Wisconsin. Remember, they've got a whole team of attorneys that would look and examine everything she writes. And they will try any type of law or statute to try and white ant her, pull the rug from underneath her feet. And they have been successful. When you think about it, and Kelly alluded to the point, you've got the bullet, item FL. You've got the human cremains. You're thinking, oh my God, that is so, so powerful. And yet the state was able to procedurally bar both of those. Oh my God. Pretty soon they're going to erase Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, that both don't exist. Why are you coming after them? They don't exist. They're no longer on the books. Bugger off and go back to Boston. That's the way these guys work. And if you don't believe me, look at what happened with Brendan Dassey and how Brad Schimmel, the Attorney General, kept on his case all the time because he was terrified. He knew that if Brendan got released, that's going to shake the foundations of having Stephen in prison, right? So hence he ensured that Brendan never got taken out and is remaining in prison. It's disgusting, it's shocking, but that's their job, guys. That's what they are designed to do, protect the verdicts.
She does have and I don't know if this is the law that she has to have this, but she does have sort of a partner in this case who for the life of me, I can't remember his name, but he is a local Wisconsin attorney. And I'm wondering if it was his advice that was sort of bad going on here. That he's the one that should have alerted her to the fact. If this is something in Wisconsin, you got to let me know, right? That's why I have a Wisconsin partner. But I'm not sure who's. It's easy to blame. I mean, when you're the captain of the ship, anything that happens under you is ultimately your responsibility, and that's where I am now. And saying, Kathleen should have known, but she wants to make a case as to why, someone else's fault. I'm glad to listen, but at the end of the day, it happened on your watch.
Yeah, I agree. I personally think we're going to hear from her soon. This is going to sound really funny, but I came to a conclusion in my own head at the moment that she won't do anything until the Johnny Depp case is over. And everyone's like, why? And I think it's more because the world is so focused on Johnny Depp right now. Everyone's consumed in it one way or the other. Whether you're consumed in it because you don't even give a shit, so you're just that dedicated, you just don't care, or you're full into it like me, who's fiends over it every day, and I'm now devastated because it's basically over. And I think she's holding back because she wants the world to listen. She needs the world to hear her and hear Stephen. And she can't drop something major when the world right now isn't focused. And I think that's fair to her. She needs everyone to really, and she said it in one of her tweets that I think has now been deleted, that she needs them to really, or maybe it was a comment from Sandy, that she just wants them to read it. They need to understand it. And I think that's where we're at. I think she's taken time out this time round because like Big Jeff said, that the fact that she potentially dropped the ball on this one, and I don't think she's willing to make that same mistake. She knows that she doesn't have much dog left in this fight. She has to make an impact. This is maybe her last shot. If this gets denied, then what? Because she's run out of, unless something comes up that's new in terms of forensic evidence, or someone becomes a whistleblower, or something dramatic takes a turn in the case, she's got nothing left. And I think that is why this time has been taken. She's really, really focusing on what she has to do now. And I think, if she does get through with the Denny side of it, I will personally salute her, because I didn't think it would be possible, only for the fact that it's such a high bar to cross when there is forensic evidence in this case that is only pointing to one person and not someone else, and the ripple effect it would have in the court system to hear that. And I just want to say again to people that don't quite understand the system that I'm learning from it as I'm reading things. If she does get an evidentiary hearing case, a lot of people are going, oh my God, this is it, the door's open. People have got to understand that the door is open only for the matter of the evidentiary hearing. It doesn't open her up to all the other factors. So if she gets in with Denny, it's only Denny that will be heard in the evidentiary hearing and what she can bring forth. She can't then start bringing up bones and things she was already procedurally barred on. So in a sense, although it's a foot in the door, it doesn't open the door completely. She still has a long way to walk through. So I just kind of wanted to press on that, because I think a lot of misconceptions about evidentiary hearing on this matter is a little bit misunderstood in the community of what it would mean. And that's just something I just really wanted to hit base before we end today. Yeah.
I agree. And look, put it this way, the world has actually stopped because the world is actually watching what's happening with the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, whether you like it or not. I'm addicted as, oops, did I just admit that? I'm sort of addicted, but I've actually learned a lot. I've actually learned the way attorneys work, right? They don't care that the truth or not the truth, they want to win. The important thing is to win. And this is what Kathleen Zellner has to do, to win, to show where the state actually got it wrong. But unfortunately, in this particular case, it's not a matter of, oh, he said, she said. In this particular case, you've got hard forensic evidence that I believe has been planted against Stephen. You now have to somehow either try and find errors in the actual trial, where certain people made fatal mistakes in reporting, in analysing the data, in analysing the forensics, or actually prove that planting took place. So for Kathleen Zellner, it's going to be very, very difficult. Is it impossible? I don't believe so. But I hope that she really does have an ace up her sleeve that's going to break this case wide open. Do I think it's about Tom Sawinski? No, I don't think so. If you can't corroborate that, it's going to be useless. She's got to have something that is bulletproof per se, one where the state has to take note. So I hope she has that ace up her sleeve. Thank you.
I agree. Just before, I'm sorry to say it again, but I agree with the ace up the sleeve. And if she does, we're going to see it. Okay. So people always say, "Oh, she's got stuff and she's holding things back." And like Dr. Silkman just said, something we're learning in the trial when you watch the Johnny Depp trial, it's not about the train wreck itself of these two actors and this whole who lied, she said bullshit, and it was the lies and the dynamics of all that. It's what I'm taking from it is what you're learning in the justice system and what the meanings are. And I think that is kind of what Dr. Silkman was saying in terms of that itself. When I'm watching it, I'm learning things about it as well. And he's right. They say they want to win. And although you don't want to fabricate too much in the courts, but you have an obligation to your client and you take it. So when people sit there and say, "Oh, why would she throw Bobby Dassey under the bus because she believes in innocence of people?" I get that. I really do, but I also see it as a strategic way because it is her job. She has to present someone else. Whether she believes it or not, it's something that she has to do. And I think that that's kind of where we're at with the Johnny case. It's learning things along the way. And just because, if she gets it in, she gets in. And if she's got something up her sleeve, this is what I was trying to get at, you will see it. What I see a lot in the community is people are saying she's holding back because she wants it to be a mic drop moment. You will hear it echo over and over and over in all these cases. And when you watch this Johnny Depp case and you're following the lawyers that are involved and they're talking about it after the case, you see them on YouTube, they all say, a lot of people don't understand. There is no mic drop moments in court. That doesn't exist unless it's on a television show. Everything in court is presented up front. So both sides seeing what they're bringing forth because they have a legal right to object and to challenge it. And that's what I've been saying with Kathleen. If she's had anything that's major, you would have seen it because this isn't a trial. She's not going to trial. She's trying to overturn a conviction, which is the next bar. So she has, and I have to say it, and I say it over and over again, she has one shot to make an impression. One. Get everything on the record to be heard up front, because if she doesn't add it, guess what happens? She gets procedurally barred because you can't add things when emotion's already put in. You have to provide proof of when that evidence came into your possession. So if you put in a motion and you didn't have some, let's say I'm going to say this something so stupid just because it's simple. Let's say I put in a motion and I'm talking about a color. And I don't have any evidence on the color, but I'm trying to put forward that the color is red. And then while that motion's going, evidence comes towards me that I was right, that it was red. I can then amend the motion to add to the file that I've now got that evidence. If I have that that evidence that the color was red and I hold off on it, I can't, and then I get denied. I then can't go back and say, "Oh no, I've got it," because they want to see proof when you got that evidence and why it wasn't attached to your motion. And this is what's going to go with this. Whatever she has now will be added. We'll finally have everything. And that goes to the Tom Sawinski thing. If she really had his call, because there's a lot of assumptions that she might have had and she's just holding off for a mic drop moment, no way. She would have added it because it would have strengthened her case. It has to. You've got to go put forth everything you have, because if you get denied, that's it. You're not going to come back and go, "Well, I actually had this, but I didn't show you." They'll say, "Your problem. You should have added it, and then we could have considered it."
Sorry, Kelly, can I just make a final comment? Because unfortunately I have to leave. It goes to show the importance of having all your experts present material during the actual trial, right? With Kathleen Zellner, this is now trying to reverse engineer what should have taken place back during the actual trial. And because I believe that Stephen Avery had a lack of experts back then, it really hurt him, because now you can see that Kathleen Zellner, with her experts, has presented all this new information that would have really cast doubt on the outcome of the case back in 2007, right? It's much more difficult now to achieve that because she has been procedurally barred. Going back to the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, you can see the power of having expert testimony now, in real time now, and how you have one expert arguing against another expert now. That never happened in the Stephen Avery trial. And so Kathleen Zellner now has to backpedal to present that side of the case and argument in 2022. And it's very difficult because they're trying to take away her voice. But if you look at the Depp and Amber Heard trial, you can see the importance of getting the testimony now on the record. So the jury is listening to this and they have an element of doubt, right? Harder to do after the fact, guys. That's a tragedy.
You honestly just summed it up so perfectly, because it really has become, especially in the Johnny and Amber case, it really has become the battle of the experts. It's their, and it wasn't just like, for example, you have Dr. Curry versus Dr. Hughes, and the contrast is so obvious that, it only takes one juror to really understand what Dr. Curry was saying, which was Johnny Depp's side, versus Amber's Dr. Hughes, and there's a game changer, because it just, and then when the juror goes back to deliberation, they come forth and say, hey, listen, you guys might not have really understood the contrast between the two, but I got it. And here is why it's stronger for the plaintiff's side, Johnny, because his expert said A, B, C, D, versus Amber's, where that only, Dr. Hughes, in my opinion, didn't even fucking say any letter of the alphabet. She was saying numbers. She was way off track. That woman was on the contrast of the expert testimonies was so different. It was just so powerful to watch one expert walk in with confidence, knows her shit, deliberate that, and just hit the juror. She connected. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Silkman. If they brought that forward in 2005 case, in terms of Teresa, that would have caused reasonable doubt. If we had experts on the stand saying the blood in the RAV makes no sense because of this, the bullet makes no sense because of this, you put that little speck of reasonable doubt in there, I truly believe that could have budged the needle, per se. It could have just moved it just a little bit, like had the jurors going, ooh, something's off.
Don't forget that white law cell phone ping is awfully odd. Don't forget that.
Oh yes, Big Jeff, you were right. If they had someone come in and say, listen, there's evidence she actually physically left, and even played on that back then, my God. I think that would have, and this is no disrespect for Jerry or Dean. I think that they had what they had in that moment, and it's a lot easier for us to sit back now and go, oh, but what about A, B, C? In that moment, they weren't considering that because they were so overwhelmed with what they were getting thrown at. They were
limited too, right, Kelly? They were limited.
They were very limited, and you have to consider that as fairness for them. That people say they dropped the ball. Other people say they were limited and they did the best that they can do. And I respect both sides of that. I do think there's times where I think, oh, if only you just did that one thing. And on the same breath, I can also say, you know what? would that have changed it though? Because at the end of the day, they were still limited with a lot of other shit. So well done, Silkman, because that is a really powerful way to bring that all in a tight box. That was perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have to leave it there for today. And this last comment that I'd like to make is the name of this episode 6 was Testing the Evidence. And Stephen Avery said, the evidence don't make no sense. And so that's how I want to leave off for today. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that for wrap up. Go ahead.
I agree with Stephen. The evidence don't make no sense.
I second that. I don't agree with the evidence makes no sense. I stand with Stephen Avery.
Yeah, 100% agree. The evidence certainly doesn't make any sense. But I think, what an incredible podcast this one was. It goes to show the maturity and our attitudes now, I believe, has changed a real lot, because we are seeing a real trial in action in real time, how the attorneys work. They don't really care about the truth per se. Their aim is to win. And we can now go back and we can look at what happened with Stephen and Brendan. Their aim was not to uncover the truth. Their aim was to win. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. And everybody out there, thank you to you too. Thanks to the people that have been in the comment section. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It is the easiest, fastest, and most effective way to support the channel. And thanks everybody on the panel again for a fantastic discussion. And this has been Discussing a Murderer.